Welcome to Outside Views, where we take an in-depth look at the obstacles the UK would face if it were to apply for EU membership again. Brexit is increasingly regarded as a mistake, and many Britons now favour joining the EU again. But what would that actually mean? Today we continue our BRITURN series, where we explore the challenges of the accession process, and in this episode we examine Chapter 30, External Relations. When discussing the prospect of the UK joining the European Union again, we must understand that there is no shortcut or special treatment for a former member. The UK would have to apply like any other country, and that means fulfilling the so-called Copenhagen criteria. These criteria demand stable democratic institutions, a functioning market economy, and the ability to adopt the entire body of EU law known as the acquis. Every applicant follows the same process, meaning this is not a negotiation in the way many would assume, even if it's called that. The EU does not bargain over its rules. The applicant country must align with them. Chapter 30 of the acquis covers external relations, meaning the UK would need to bring its entire foreign policy, trade policy and international commitments in line with EU law. This is a complex and far-reaching chapter because it requires compliance not just with EU regulations, but also with the Union's collective approach to international diplomacy, trade agreements, and humanitarian policies. This would mean undoing a significant portion of the UK's post-Brexit trade policy and realigning it with EU priorities. The UK has signed a few trade agreements since leaving the EU, including deals with Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and of course, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP. These agreements were negotiated independently, often with terms that diverge from EU trade policy. To join the EU again, the UK would need to abandon or renegotiate these agreements to ensure they confirm with the EU's common commercial policy. This would be a politically difficult process because these agreements have been presented as successes of Brexit, despite they are not, though. Another major challenge under this chapter is that the EU operates as a single entity in global trade negotiations. And this means the UK would lose its ability to negotiate separate trade deals and instead adopt the EU's external trade policy. For many Brexiteers, this would be seen as a surrender of sovereignty, although it's BS, despite the fact that EU trade agreements are often more comprehensive and offer greater economic benefits than the UK's current deals. The UK would also need to align with the EU's position in international organizations such as the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, and other global institutions. As an EU member, the UK would no longer have an independent seat at some international trade negotiations, but it would instead be represented by the European Commission. This would require a significant shift in diplomatic strategy, reversing the independent foreign policy stance the UK has taken since Brexit. In addition to trade policy, Chapter 30 also covers humanitarian aid and development assistance. The UK currently operates its own international aid policy through the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, but EU membership would require it to align with the European Consensus on Development. This means coordinating aid policies with EU institutions and contributing to collective EU humanitarian efforts. This would not necessarily be a disadvantage, as the EU is one of the world's largest aid donors, but it would require a restructuring of the UK's foreign aid commitments. Another critical element of external relation is sanctions policy. The EU applies sanctions collectively, meaning that the UK would no longer be able to unilaterally impose or lift sanctions on countries, individuals or organizations. Post-Brexit, the UK has developed its own sanctions regime, including measures against Russia, Belarus and various other actors. Joining the EU again would require the UK to align completely with EU decisions on sanctions, losing its ability to take independent action but be part of the process. And this could be a major issue in areas where UK and EU policy have diverged since Brexit. Beyond trade and foreign policy, Chapter 30 also touches on relations with former colonies and overseas territories. The UK maintains close ties with Commonwealth nations, and Brexit was framed by some as an opportunity to deepen these relationships. However, joining the EU again would require reconfiguring the UK's approach to these nations, particularly in areas where EU policies differ from existing UK commitments. The UK's overseas territories, such as Gibraltar, the Falkland Islands and Bermuda, would also be affected, as they would once again fall under the EU's external relations framework. This could create tensions, particularly in regions where Brexit was seen as an opportunity for greater autonomy from EU influence. Reintegrating into the EU's external relations framework would also mean recommitting to the EU's policies on human rights, democracy promotion and conflict resolution. The UK has always been a strong advocate for these values, but Brexit has allowed it to pursue them independently. Returning to the EU would mean working within a collective framework, which could sometimes mean compromising on national preferences in favor of a broader EU approach. One of the most politically sensitive aspects of joining the EU's external relations policy again is the question of defense and security cooperation. While the UK has remained a strong military power and a NATO member, Brexit has reduced its direct participation in EU security initiatives. Joining the EU again would mean re-engaging with programs such as the Common Foreign and Security Policy and the Permanent Structured Cooperation Framework. This could be controversial domestically, as some would see it as a further loss of sovereignty, although it's BS once again. However, it could also strengthen the UK's security capabilities by reintegrating with EU intelligence sharing and defence coordination mechanisms. And joining the EU again is not just about undoing Brexit. It's about aligning with an entire system of laws, policies and commitments that have evolved since the UK left. External relations is one of the most complex areas of the accession process because it touches on every aspect of international diplomacy, trade and security. Unlike some other chapters of the acquis where changes can be made gradually, external relations require immediate and full compliance upon accession. The UK would have to ensure that all its existing agreements, policies and international commitments align with EU law before it could complete this chapter. And this means the UK would need to engage in extensive diplomatic negotiations, not just with the EU, but also with third countries affected by these changes. This would take years and require careful political management to ensure that domestic stakeholders understand the necessity of these adjustments. There would be significant pushback from those who see external relations as a core part of national sovereignty. At the same time, there would be economic and diplomatic benefits from reintegration, as the UK would once again be part of one of the world's most influential political and economic blocs. Ultimately, completing Chapter 30 would be one of the most challenging aspects of the accession process for the UK. It would require reversing key elements of the UK's post-Brexit international strategy and reintegrating with EU foreign trade and also humanitarian policies. This is not just a matter of negotiation, but of fundamental alignment with the EU's entire approach to global affairs. And if the UK is ever serious about joining again, it must be prepared to undertake this process in full. That's it for today's episode of BRITURN, and if you found this video informative, don't forget to like, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below the video. How do you see the UK handling this chapter of the accession process? I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching, and the next video is right here in the end screen.